Hola, muy buenos días. Es un gusto estar aquí en el día de hoy. Vamos a dar unos 3 minutos, mientras que son las 9 de la mañana, para poder comenzar a tiempo. Gracias por acompañarnos en el día de hoy. And thank you, Professor Cullen, for joining us today. We will give 2 more minutes until it's 9 a.m. so we can start.
Great. While we're waiting, I can explain the view behind me is a photograph I took. I'm not actually sitting outside the University of Oxford. It's a photograph I took from where I used to live, and that's known as the Dreaming Spires of Oxford. Matthew Arnold, the English poet, wrote about the Dreaming Spires of Oxford, and that was the spot at which he was talking when I took that photograph.
Also good. So beautiful picture. Beautiful
Thanks.
picture. Tim, I will do a short introduction in Spanish and then we will start, okay?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Hola, muy buenos días. Es un gusto para mí tener este webinar de cómo negociar de manera más inteligente. Nos acompaña Tim Cullen, ya voy a hacer la introducción, pero antes de comenzar quisiera dar un agradecimiento a nuestros miembros Diamond, Compensar, Pilgrim Security, Morenos, KPMG y G Consultores, Halion, Pasarex, SIT y compañía, a Dalid y a nuestro auditor BDO, quienes también apoyan este tipo de iniciativas. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining today. We're very happy to have here with us Professor Tim Cullen. We have been speaking with Professor Cullen for a couple of months now. So we can have this webinar today of how to negotiate smarter. And it is the official launch of our program on negotiation that will be held in Bogota in August. So let me give a short introduction of who is Professor Tim Cullen. He's a professor at the University of Oxford, and also at Peking University in China, in Beijing. And well, he has taught negotiation in more than 25 countries, including North Korea. And he has been involved in negotiation with the United Nations, with the World Bank, with the corporate institutions. And well, in this life of negotiation, he has been teaching and practicing negotiation and negotiation skills for more than 25 years. Founder of the program negotiation of the University of Oxford in 2003. So here, Professor Cullen, hello, and thanks for joining today. Here in Colombia, this week is last week the World Cup of soccer started, and today is the first match where Colombia plays. So there's an expression here of very good soccer and football players that when they're very good, they are a crack. Yes, and so maybe this applies to you, like you're the negotiation crack. Uh, it's a term used in like for younger generations, like of really outstanding people in their field. So thanks a lot of joining today. We're very happy to have you here. And well, right now we have more than 30 people that have joined at this webinar. That will be like a small introduction. So I'll give you the word to you. And thank you for being part of this webinar and also for supporting and being part of the master class that we'll be giving in August. So welcome.
Welcome everybody. Thank you very much, Santiago. And today is the first game that Colombia is playing. It's also the first game that England is playing. So important day for both our countries. And it'd be very nice if 2 or 3 weeks from now, whatever it is, the final is between Colombia and England. Let's see how it goes. So good luck to both our teams tonight. Delighted to be here. Let me just add a little bit more about myself. I first heard the word negotiation when I was 15 years old. My father was a diplomat working in Stockholm in Sweden, and he was helping to negotiate the creation of the European Free Trade Association. And every night he'd come back and talk about the negotiations, and I became intrigued. It made me very keen on free trade. It also made me very keen on negotiation. My first job was with Ford Motor Company. I was a press officer with Ford Motor Company, and I was dealing with the press, talking about Ford's negotiations with their trade unions, and they were terrible. The trade unions were trying to destroy the company, and Ford was trying to do their best to negotiate with people who did not want to negotiate a good result for their members of the union. Ford then moved me to America, and it was totally different. In America, the unions' negotiations were geared towards enlarging the pie so that the company did really well, they could afford to pay people more, and so on. It's a completely different approach. I was involved in many negotiations during 21 years at the World Bank. I ended up as the chief spokesman of the World Bank, as head of the World Bank office in Europe. And during those 21 years, I did lots of negotiations, and I thought I was pretty good. Well, let me tell you, I was not very good. I was exposed to a very good negotiator who was trying to facilitate agreements on better ways of building hydropower projects. And I just realized how little I knew when I saw him in action. So I said to him, where do I learn to negotiate? Because I'm going to be leaving the World Bank in a couple of years' time, and I'd really like to become a negotiator. So he told me to go to Harvard, and I went to Harvard. I had a couple of courses at Harvard. And then in 2003, I had the chutzpah, the courage, to start the Oxford Program on Negotiation. It's grown over the years, is now one of the best negotiation programs in the world. We have a group of excellent professors, got hundreds of graduates and alumni and so on. So that's done very well. So that was how I got into it. So what I'm saying is that doesn't matter how old you are, you can still learn more about negotiation. And you may think you're a good negotiator, there's still more you can learn. My task today is a bit difficult because I'm going to be doing a 2-day program on the 24th and 25th of August at BritCham. That's going to be a masterclass. Over 2 days, we do lots of things, lots of role play simulations. I go into everything in a lot of detail. Today, because we only have an hour and a half, I'm just going to talk about the key principles, just the tip of the iceberg. That's all I can talk about today. So I'll be telling you enough that everybody who's attending this webinar will take away useful information that they can use tomorrow. But also, I hope you'll be tempted to come back and get a lot more information from the program we do in August. So let's get started. First of all, I want you to look at this slide and look at the 8 potential attributes of a good negotiator. And I want you each to pick just one. Ability to think strategically, empathy, self-awareness, self-confidence, integrity, patience, determination to win, and knowledge of the subjects. So if you could put the number that you've done a poll. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, whoever's done that. If you could vote for just one, only one, and say which one you think is most important.
1 second, that they are including another on the 8th. One moment, please.
Okay.
Okay, now the poll is ready.
Vote now, please. Say which ones you you can only vote once.
Okay, 13 answers. Still more to come.
And everybody see what the voting is showing.
Yes, and we can see the variation of the depending on the votes of the people.
Right.
We have 16 answers right now.
Right. Yeah, we need to do it quite quickly now. So
if you vote Tim, you can see the results. Okay.
Well, I can see the results in front of me. I can see it now.
Okay, perfect.
So, and if you can all see it as well, that's very helpful. Well, let me tell you, 45% of you, by far the biggest category, voted number 2, empathy. That is my favorite. That's the one I would vote for if I'm going to choose one. Now, all of the others except one are absolutely good. They're all fine. So, for instance, ability to think strategically, patience, very important, and knowledge of the subject, also very important. I was a little bit sorry to see that 3 of you chose determination to win. Let me tell you why I don't like people saying that. Because if you win, just think about it. What does the other party do? If you win, what does the person you're negotiating do? They lose.
Mm.
You don't want the other party to be unhappy. You want both parties to get enough out of the negotiation. They go back to their companies or wherever they work and say, we got a good deal. Whereas if one party feels they've really been defeated, they've lost, that will be difficult to implement the deal because they're going to be unhappy and the deal may unravel. So try to avoid the idea of winning and losing. It's people sometimes talk about win-win, but just getting a good deal for yourself, but make sure the other side gets something they're reasonably content with. In fact, I never use the word opponent when I'm talking about somebody I'm negotiating with. I use the word counterpart or the person across the table or some neutral expression like that. I never use the term opponent. So it's just very showing that slide. Empathy, I'm so glad so many of you chose that because to me that is the most important one. So let's move on based on what we just saw. The first golden rule does relate to empathy. It's the idea that you need to put yourself in the other side's shoes. When you're negotiating and before you're negotiating, look at everything from the other party's point of view, the other person across the table, what's important to them. So first of all, before you even get into the negotiation, you need to develop a relationship. I've negotiated and taught a lot in China. In China, if you go to negotiate in China, I don't know whether any of you have done, you'll find that when you arrive there, you want to get on with the negotiation, but the Chinese want to take you to see the Forbidden Palace, the Forbidden City, the Summer Palace, the Great Wall. They want to take you to some great restaurants to eat food, which some of it is great, some of it is peculiar. Why are they doing this? They're getting to know you. They're developing a relationship. In China, they call it guangxi, is the importance of a relationship. So in any negotiation, you need to get to know who the other person is. They won't necessarily be your friend, but you can find things in common with them, so you do have a relationship. Very, very important. When you study the other party, you need to figure out what pressures they may be under, what they need to gain. Look at it from, you know what you need to gain for the negotiation. Pay very careful attention to what they need to gain. And if they mention something that is not even on your radar, but may be very important to them, pay attention to that, because it may be that because it's important to them, but you haven't even thought about it, it may be easy for you to give away in return for something you need, because negotiation is all about giving something up in order to get something better in return. It's just like international trade. Just like international trade, comparative advantage where one party can, for instance, in England, we don't do a very good job of producing bananas, so we can't export bananas. We import our bananas, but we export high-tech things, and we export Scotch whiskey, for example, because we can do that. So we're looking at where negotiation is exactly the same, where you can give something away and get something better in return. Now, the key thing in negotiation at the beginning is preparation. Abraham Lincoln said this great quote, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe." The preparation is all important. Put more time into sharpening the axe than actually doing the job itself. So pay a lot of attention to preparation. It's really important. And so you need to be looking at the people, the issues, and the process. So the people in the negotiation, it's yourself and your colleagues, the people behind the table, it's the people you're negotiating with across the table, and it's other people who are not at the table, either that have an interest on your side or an interest on the other party's side. Map all the people that may be important. So part of that process is then to fully research the issues, know the issues. That's the people, but you need to know the issues. Great detail about everything that's important in this negotiation. And that will help you determine between the things that you would like to get, the things you want, the things you really need to get. So you actually need to do some to actually list things as to how important they are. So give the various things you're looking for in the negotiation a score from 1 to 10, and 10 means something you really desperately need to get, and 1 means something you'd like to get but you could give away. Know your aspiration point. The aspiration point is the very highest possible result you can get, the very best possible result. If everything goes wonderfully, that's the aspiration point. It's what you aspire to, but it needs to be optimistic. Obviously, you need to be positive, but it needs to be realistic. Don't have unrealistic hopes, because that will be very unhelpful. And then the process is very important as well. Setting the agenda. Don't let the other party do so by mistake. So the process is how often you're going to meet, how long your sessions will last for, if you're going to have deadlines. A lot of things like that actually have quite an impact. They're mechanical, it's process, but they're important. Don't let the other party do so by default. And the European Union set the agenda in the Brexit negotiations. Let me just say a word or two about Brexit. We in the UK have been immensely fortunate because our government donated to the entire population, completely free of charge, a masterclass in how not to negotiate. The politicians in Britain were dreadful in their negotiations. They did not know what they were doing. They made every mistake in the book. I've written several articles about this that were published. So let me just give you an example of this. I want to ask what's wrong with this picture. So you see the people in this picture. Well, what's wrong? The people on the left are the European Union. Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator in the middle, very dapper Frenchman, and two female colleagues on the left. And on the right is the British delegation team. So David Davis, who's the Minister for Brexit, and Ollie Robbins, who's just been fired as the top civil servants at the Foreign Office, he was there as well. But you notice something about it. The people on the European Union side have got lots and lots of papers. They're very well prepared. They're all set to go. They're got well briefed. The people on the British side, David Davis just smiling, and Ollie Robbins has written the entire negotiation strategy on a post-it note sitting in front of him. So this is an example of how some people prepare, some people don't. If you prepare, you're going to be much better off. Now, know your BATNA. Any of you who've ever had exposure to any negotiation teaching before will know this expression, BATNA. It's a very, very common expression in negotiation. It's a very important thing to understand. It sounds complicated. All these jargon words sound complicated. Actually, BATNA is not complicated. So let me give you a definition. It stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement, BATNA. And what it really says, it's the point at which you should abandon negotiations rather than make further concessions. So when you give something to the other party, we call that a concession, and you're hoping you get something in return as well. But if in order to get what you want, you're going to have to make further concessions, you're going to reach a point where any more concessions will mean you're really going to lose everything, and you just don't want to do that. So it's better to stop the negotiation, go and find somebody else to negotiate with, find an alternative. So it's the best alternative to an agreement. So what I want you to think about is the fact that if you can see my hand, this is my BATNA here. The other person has a BATNA as well, which is completely the opposite of my BATNA because they want different things. So their BATNA's up here. So there's their BATNA, here's your BATNA. The area between the two, where they overlap, is called the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. That area is the zone of possible agreement. So let me just show the rest of this slide. So both parties need to do better than their BATNA in order to get an agreement. The two BATNAs define a zone of possible agreement, and the better your BATNA appears to you and the other party, the stronger your position to negotiate an agreement. But do not reveal your BATNA. Now, this sounds a bit tricky, but supposing you're selling your car and your neighbor sees your nice clean car outside your house and asks how much you're selling it for, and you say, well, I haven't decided yet. People are coming to look at it tomorrow. Your neighbor says, well, I'm in the market for a new car. Maybe I'd give you, easiest for me to say in dollars, I'll give you $15,000. You say, you're serious? He says, yeah, $15,000, definitely. So the next day, people come and look at the car. Your BATNA is $15,000. Your neighbor has offered you $15,000. You cannot go below that. Why do you not reveal your BATNA? Well, if you said to the people looking at your car, I already have an offer of $15,000, how much will they give you? They'll offer you $15,001, not $15,100, just $15,001, the very smallest amount above what is your BATNA. So I hope this doesn't sound too confusing, and I'm going to ask my colleagues at BritCham if they can circulate a PDF of all these slides after I finish, so you can see everything that's there. But it's a very important concept. We'll refer to it later. So moving on. Very important is the question of positions and interests. Now, you hear people talk about this is our position in the negotiation. Positions are things you state in an opening statement or proposal to the people you're negotiating with. They're stated openly, everybody can hear what you're saying, and they're a goal for what we seek to get out of it. It's laying down a marker. This is what we hope to get. This is what we plan to get. But some people will often try to emphasize their position by threats of red lines or the phrase, this is non-negotiable. A red line is when you say, this is what we want, and here is a red line we will not cross. In the Brexit negotiations, the Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, said on many, many issues, when she invoked Article 50 to start the Brexit process, she said on many occasions, this is a red line we will not cross. Now, the problem is with laying down red lines which you will not cross is that sometimes you will have to give up on those things because you need to get something in return which is important to you. It's not a good idea to do that. Barack Obama learned this the hard way when he told President Assad of Syria, if you use chemical weapons against your own people, we will punish you. That's a red line. He did use chemical weapons, and Obama did nothing and lost all credibility. So don't use that term red lines, and never in a negotiation say this is non-negotiable. Now, the important thing about, because you're in a negotiation, you don't want to say to the other person, this is non-negotiable. However, you can say that to your own team. You can say that to your colleagues in private. You can say, that's a red line. We're never going to give that to them, or this is non-negotiable. Say that to you, but don't ever say it to the other party. Now, what we're much more interested in the positions is interests. Interests are all the underlying concerns on which a stated position is based. This is a beautiful image of an iceberg, and think of the tip of the iceberg as the bit you can see. It's the headline, it's the position you've stated. But you stated that position because you based it on lots and lots and lots of issues that will lead to that. And we call those interests. The good thing about that is there are many more interests than there are positions. So you can do more deals with the interests. So you can say you've got half a dozen issues that you are willing to give up on. You can say to the other party, look, I can give this to you or I can give that to you, but I want that in return, something else in return. Those are all interests, and that's what we pay most attention to. So understanding all your interests and all those of your counterparts enables you to make mutually beneficial trades, because you're looking to give them something they need and you get something back that you need. So let me just expand on this a little bit. You need to find out as much as you can about your counterpart's interests. Your research before the negotiations start should include finding out everything you can about their interests. They'll tell you what their position is, but hear what they say about their interests, the underlying issues. Very, very important. If your counterpart states a position which confuses you, you don't know why, it's mystifying, why is this important to them, I can't understand, there's nothing wrong with asking why. Ask that question, why. The worst thing I can say is, I'm not going to tell you. But if you do ask them why, you may well get an answer which will put your mind at rest that it's not maybe such a big deal. But ask the question why is very important. Now, let me tell you a little story, because people may have different reasons for wanting the same thing they state in their position. So let me tell you a little story. This is a story of an orange. There are two sisters in the house with their mother. There's a big bowl of fruit on the dining room table, and the mother says to each sister, take a piece of fruit. Now, there are apples and lemons, bananas, pears, peaches, but there's only one orange, and both sisters reach at the same time for the orange. The mother says, wait a minute. Now, she could cut the orange in half. Each person would get 50% of what they want. That's a solution. But she doesn't. She says, why do you want the orange? One sister says, I want to bake a cake, and the zest, the flavor from the peel of the orange is very, very flavorful. The zest of the orange will really brighten up the taste of my cake. Turns to the other sister and says, why do you need the orange? She says, well, I'm thirsty. I want to squeeze myself a glass of orange juice. So the mother, instead of cutting it in half, she peels the orange, gives the outside to the sister who wants to bake a cake, and the inside to the sister who wants a glass of orange juice to squeeze. They both get 100% of what they want, because they're looking for different issues in what they want. So let me give you another example of this. Well, this is just what I just explained there. Two people may perceive the same issue differently. The same issue right of a negotiation. We have high value to one side, low cost to the other. We create value by trading on these differences. But let me just move on. I'm not going to ask you, because it's too difficult to get answers here, really. If anybody recognizes either of the people on the cover of Time magazine in September 1977, please do put it in the chat. I'd be delighted if anybody recognizes either of these two gentlemen. So if you do, please put it in the chat. So let me explain. The clue is the map on the right. This was in 1977. There had been a series of wars between Israel and Egypt, and you can see Egypt on the left, Israel on the right. Egypt, a much, much bigger country. And at this particular point, after several wars, the Sinai Peninsula, very good, well done. Sadat and Begin, absolutely right, very good. Is that Wolf? Is that your name, Wolf? Terrific, well done. Anwar Sadat, Menachem Begin, great, very good. Well, many of the people I teach do not know that, so excellent that you did. So there have been all these disputes. Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, did something quite unexpected. he announced that if he got an invitation from Menachem Begin, the Prime Minister of Israel, he would travel to Jerusalem and address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. This was completely unexpected, and Menachem Begin said, please come. So he went to Israel and he addressed the Knesset, and he treated Israel as a neighbor, not as a friend, but at least as a neighbor, somebody you need to talk to. That unlocked a great deal of enthusiasm globally because everybody was trying to get these two countries to come to peace talks. So President Jimmy Carter invited them both to Washington, not to the White House, but to Camp David, a very simple little community of small wooden houses in the mountains of Maryland with no telephones, good security, but nothing, no reporters, which is rather the main thing, no journalists. And when they were there was a lot of shuttle diplomacy that went back and forth between the delegations, but eventually Jimmy Carter said, why do you both want the Sinai? Ask that simple question, why do you want the Sinai? The answers are interesting. Israel said, we want it to safeguard ourselves from a surprise invasion. If there is an Egyptian army and bomber aircraft and rockets and everything like that in the Sinai, they can overrun us in half a day. But if we own the Sinai, there's a buffer. It'll take them some time getting across the Sinai in order to attack us, and we'll get plenty of warning. That's why we want the Sinai. Turned to Anwar Sadat and said, why do you want it? He said, because it is Egyptian. It was Egyptian at the time of the pharaohs when we built the pyramids. It should be Egyptian today. It should be this. It's very important to us emotionally. It should be sovereign Egyptian territory, but the same color on the map as the rest of Egypt. So they wanted it for two entirely different reasons. So the deal they made was that Israel's interest lay in security, Egypt's lay in sovereignty. So what they did was they said that Egypt would be given sovereignty over the Sinai, but they would guarantee never to have weapons there, never to have a military presence there, so that Israel knew they were safe from what their concern was. And it's known as the Camp David Accords. It's the United Nations treaty which embodied this, that both sides signed, and it has kept the peace ever since 1978. So Israel's interests, their positions were they both on the Sinai, same position. Israel's interest was security, Egypt's interest was sovereignty. So two differences. So what we talk about there is known as integrative bargaining. The story of the orange, both sisters get what they want from the same orange. Egypt and Israel both get what they want from the Sinai. That's at the bottom of this page here. What is also very common is distributive bargaining. This is the pizza. So there's a pizza I bought from my local co-op. I brought it home. My wife put it in the oven for me, and feeling very generous, I allowed my wife to have the first slice. So once the slice had left the plate and was in my wife's stomach, that was no longer available to me. So think of that in negotiations. When one party gains something, that's no longer available to the other party. We call that distributive bargaining. Just as a certain amount to be distributed, a set amount to be distributed, and you're hoping you'll get more than the other party. It's not integrative like the other example. You're hoping you'll get a bit more, but it's like the pizza. So if it is like the pizza like that, try to expand it. Try to look at additional interests. If you're talking about cost of something, look at all the credit terms, foreign exchange things, lots of variables that can make it more interesting to get an agreement you can both agree to. So claiming value is distributed pizza, bargaining the pizza, creating values, integrated bargaining the orange or the Sinai. Now, when you're learning about negotiation, one very important thing to know is that you can easily fall into psychological traps, decision traps. And the most important of these, in my mind, is the anchoring trap. The anchoring trap is the idea that if one party talks a lot about a particular number or a particular outcome, it gets embedded in everybody's minds, and so they're drawn towards that. Now, There's another bias I just want to mention. It's called the availability bias. I'm only going to look at two biases. When I come back in August, I'll be talking about many, many biases and about how the brain works and how the prefrontal cortex works and how the amygdala works and how we make bad decisions and heuristics and so on. We'll talk a lot about that. Thinking fast and slow, we call it. But I just want to look at two today. Anchoring is so important because if one party anchors the discussion around something they're interested in, it's a big advantage. The other one is the availability bias. So let me give you just these two examples I'm taking. So the availability bias is where if you base your decisions on readily available information, in other words, the first thing that comes into your head, the first thing that comes to mind, you may make mistakes. You need to look at the whole picture, not the first thing that comes into your mind. So let's look at these two. Let me look at an example of anchoring. I don't know if any of you recognize him. I'll give you the opportunity to write that down in the chat, but I'll be very surprised if anybody does it. You'll be amazing if you do. He died a long time ago, but he was connected with a very important musical group. Anybody know who he is? Well, his name was Brian Epstein. He was the person who discovered the Beatles, and he made the Beatles into big superstars. And he made a big mistake on anchoring. United Artists Studios in Hollywood had decided they wanted to make a movie about the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night. You probably know the song, Beatles song, It's Been a Hard Day's Night. The movie is called A Hard Day's Night. It's a very funny movie, actually. The Beatles are very funny in it. So the Beatles were paid a certain sum of money to act in the movie, be themselves really, but to act in the movie. But what happens with movies is the actors are paid a set amount, whatever happens, but then they are given a percentage of the royalties. If the film does well and makes a lot of money, they get a percentage of that as well on top of what their pay is. So he went to Hollywood to negotiate what the royalties would be for A Hard Day's Night. So he went to see the people at United Artists. Before he walked in, the suits at United Artists had talked amongst themselves and said, look, let's all agree we will not give the Beatles any more than 25% of the royalties. So they all agreed on that, no more than 25% of the royalties. Brian Epstein walked in and said, gentlemen, they did not announce that. Of course, United Artists didn't say what they were prepared to give, but Brian Epstein walked in very confidently and said, gentlemen, the boys and I will accept nothing less than 5% of the royalties. 5% compared with 25%. So people at United Artists were willing to give 25%. He had said, we want at least 5%. So they said, well, can we take a short break? And they went out, they changed the agreement and said, please sign here as soon as you can. Why had he got it so wrong? Well, it's the context. In the movie industry, 25% is normal. In the music industry, 5% is normal. He had not done his homework. Preparation is all important for any negotiation. He had not done his homework. He did not know what rates were in the movie industry, only what they were in the music industry. And as a result, the Beatles made very little money on A Hard Day's Night. So that's an example of a mistake in anchoring. Now, another question. I want you to look at this, and it is actually a poll. I don't know how easy it is to set up. It's only two questions. I want you to decide whether you think there are more words in this book ending in ing or more words that have n as the next last letter. So you need to answer one or two if that can be set up. While that's being done, let me just explain. The book I'm showing you there is a very good book about negotiation. I can highly recommend it. It's from a very distinguished writer. Her books normally cost hundreds of dollars, but this particular one is um, quite inexpensive little books. But
Okay,
I only need two answers, one or two.
they're setting up the poll right now. One
Right,
second, please.
that's okay.
Can you share the screen again, please?
Well, it's been taken over by what you're doing.
One moment.
There we are. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And now, 1 second.
So this could be, let me tell you, this could be any book in English. I've chosen this one because it's about negotiation. It could be any book in English. And I just want you to think if there are more words in any book in English than in ing, or more that have N as the next last letter. And when the poll comes up, if you could just vote one or two, not both, just one or two. That's great. Well, 81% or 13 of you are saying it's one, and 3 of you are saying it's two. So all those people who said it's number one, let me just ask you a quick question. You don't need to answer it. You just think about it yourselves. ING, what is the next last letter in ING? It's N, isn't it? So therefore, words ending in ING all have N in them as the next last letter, plus words like hang, ginseng, wrong, wrong, all those words, negotiation, second edition, anyone at any time. So in other words, the answer is two, because N is the next last letter in many, many words, including ING. So it's all the ING words plus all the others. The reason that you chose that is because it was readily available to you. You're listening, I'm talking, I'm waving, you're reading. They're all ing words. It's the present participle in English is made by adding ing to the end of a verb. So we're all the time, every minute of the day, we're doing many words ending in ing. So but it was familiar to you, so you went with the readily available information. In negotiation, if you go with the first piece of information that comes to your mind, you make big mistakes. So make sure you think things through very carefully. Don't just go instinctively with the first thing you think of. Okay. I want to say a little bit something else. We look at psychological biases in negotiation because they are very important, and we look at the other psychological thing we look at is how to influence people and what is the best way to influence people. And we draw on psychology a lot for that as well. So when I'll be teaching in August, I'll be teaching a lot of these biases and so on, but I'll also be teaching quite a long session, more than an hour and a half, on persuasion and influence. And I'll be looking at Aristotle. I'll also be looking at Bob Cialdini, a modern American professor who's done thousands of experiments, and they dovetail very closely with what Aristotle said. But Aristotle, in his book, or it wasn't a book, but his treatise, Rhetoric, talked about logos, ethos, and pathos. Anytime you're trying to persuade people, logos, ethos, and pathos will always be present, these Greek words. By logos, he means the subject matter. It means the whatever you're describing, whatever the subject is, the issue you're talking about, logos. But you need to make it as simple as possible. So the expression, the KISS principles, keep it simple, stupid, or keep it short and simple. Make your complicated arguments as simple as you can. Tell stories, use metaphors, find lots of ways to make these complicated issues very digestible to the people you're talking to. Ethos, he described that as the character of the messenger. It's how you come across. If people listening to you trust you, they think you're a good listener, for example, they think you're an authority on the subject, and you can do little things to make them feel that, but without showing off. That's the ethos. They'll regard you well and they'll pay attention to what you say. Pathos is the Your understanding of the audience is knowing what's important to them. If you find things you have in common with them, if some of you both support Arsenal, for example, the English football club, or Manchester United or Manchester City, that's something in common. And so if you can find things in common with your audience, capitalize on that as well. So logos, ethos, and pathos will always be there every time you're negotiating, every time you're persuading. They're always going to be there. So you need to pay attention. And how do I make the complicated arguments simpler, easy to understand? How do I make myself likable? How do I make myself somebody people believe? And pathos is, what do I find about the other party that we can find things in common? So I'll come back to it in much more detail in August. So I want to go on to talk about a few strategies for getting results in negotiations. First of all, should you make the first offer? Well, I'm not going to do a poll on this because it's either yes or no, and I can give you the answer straight away. The answer is it yes or no? The answer is it depends. As so often is the case, the correct answer is it depends. So what does it depend on? It depends on how much you found out about the other party, how much you found out about what they want, how good your research has been, how successful you've been in getting under their skin, putting yourself in their shoes. If you found out a great deal about what they're going to want from the negotiation, it's best that you go first for reasons of anchoring. If you go first and you put your proposal on the table, you will anchor it around what you're interested in. And that's why anchoring is so important. You put what you put on the table first and start talking a lot about, that will anchor the discussion around that. If, however, you've been very unsuccessful in finding out what the other party wants, it's best to let them go first. A lot of people who are not experienced negotiators are often very tempted to just wait for the other party to make a proposal because that's easy, and then they can just do a response to that. But you lose the chance of anchoring. So if you let them, if you don't know much about letting them go first, will tell you a lot about what they want. So that's it. It does depend on those two things, whether to go first or not, whether to make the first offer or not. What should my first offer be? That's the next question. Well, remember, we talked about the Zopa, and I'll do it with my hands again. So your BATNA's down here, their BATNA's up here, the Zopa is in between. So when you make your first offer, it should be outside the Zopa. So their BATNA's here, so your offer should be up there, outside the Zopa. So when they counteroffer, they'll come back into the Zopa, but they'll come back at their end of the Zopa, not at your end of the Zopa, not close to your BATNA, it'll be close to their BATNA. So it's very important. You offer just outside the Zopa, just worse than their BATNA. Now, some people make the mistake of saying, well, I'll make a very big proposal, which is way outside. Don't do that. That would just confuse people and it will lose any value. When you make your offer, provide a justification. Explain why you think this is a good offer and why you think they should accept it. You should set high but realistic aspirations, as I mentioned earlier. Hope for the best, but be realistic. And then also, very important, consider the context and the relationship. This may be the first round of several negotiations on different subjects. You may be regularly negotiating with this company or something like that. You need to keep the relationship good. So you need to pay attention to that this is just one part of a much longer process. So that may make you a little more generous or whatever, but pay attention to the whole context for your offer. Now, this slide is a very important one that a lot of people aren't really aware of, and I really want to stress it. It is really, really important. When you are negotiating, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have positions, but you'll have interests. You want to bring as many issues to the table as possible. These are all your interests. The more issues on the table, the more opportunity there is to make trades. So supposing you've established that there are 20 issues you're going to be trying to negotiate. Both of you understand that these 20 are the most important. There's a great temptation to start at the top and say, right, number one, negotiate it and say, right, we've done that. It may be the most difficult thing or maybe the easiest thing, depending on how you're approaching it. But what I'm urging you is keep all 20 open until the end. Negotiate up to a point, find out more and more about what each of you want, and say, okay, well, let's come back to that later, and do that with all of them. Don't settle items one at a time on a list, because if you've got 20 items on a list and you settle them as they come up, by the time you get to 16, you only have 4 left. You can't package things together. You want to be able to package things together. You want to be able to say, look, I know that you need item number 12 and item number 16, and I need item number 7 and item number 17. Can we do a deal on those two? Because I'm willing to give those two away in return for the two that I need from you. So you need to package things together like that. Group issues together, make reciprocal package deals. Reciprocal means that you give me something, I give you something. And use square brackets. Any lawyers amongst you are familiar with that expression, that you put something that's not been finally decided in square brackets. So you should have 20 sets of square brackets, giving a bit of a sense of where both sides are coming from, and then you then go back in and group things together to make your deals. So this is a very, very important concept. People who do our program in Oxford say this is one of the things that they've discovered has helped them most from their future negotiations. Now, I want to talk to you now about some lessons from international negotiations. The first is Brexit, and I've listed it there as Boris's bravado. You know who Boris is, or why he's still alive. He lives actually not very far from me here. Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister who pushed through Brexit, wanted a very hard Brexit, wanted a complete break with the European Union. And one of the first mistakes he made, he started insulting the Europeans, insulting the French president, insulting the head of the European Union, saying very rude things about them. That is not a good way to start a negotiation. Then they would state things they wanted to get from the negotiation, and they stated red lines that they would not cross. Then later they discovered that they were really stuck because they needed to give away those red lines. They also allowed their negotiators, this is the politicians, by the way. The civil servants are very good, but the politicians are the ones that had the problem. They would leak information to the press, and the press the Daily Telegraph, who was very much in favor of the European Union, would publish that the UK was going to show weakness by giving something away. Now, the reason it was going to be given away was because they're going to get something much bigger in return, but they'd be picked up by the press and in a misleading way. So it was very unhelpful. So Brexit really was a masterclass in how not to negotiate. There are many, many other aspects of it, and I'll get into those in more detail in August. I want to mention the Uruguay round. This is the trade round, started off as a general agreement on tariffs and trade and ended up being the World Trade Organization. So by 1994, at the end of the negotiation, this was the establishment of the World Trade Organization. And the trade negotiations have been through many rounds. I mentioned my father's involvement with the setting up of the Stockholm Convention for the European Free Trade Association. My father then was posted from Stockholm to Washington, and he became a negotiator on the Kennedy round, which was a round of negotiations under the auspices of the GATT, same as the WTO, but it was under John F. Kennedy's leadership. After Kennedy died, they had another round, which is called the Dillon round, after the Secretary of State, who was the Secretary of the Treasury was James Dillon. And so they've had these many, many rounds. The longest one ever and the most successful one was the Uruguay round from 1986 to 1994. What became very important then, is important to remember in negotiations, is the importance of coalitions, the importance of getting allies to work together with you. And those negotiations took so long because the groups that worked together were very extreme. They either from developing countries who's saying the world has been very unfair to us, which is true. The world is very unfair to developing countries, and we need lots of things in return and so on. And so the rich countries were alienated by that. The rich countries did other things that alienated the developing countries. There were big issues related to agriculture because the European Union is giving big agricultural subsidies, and that was called the Cairns Group, was the one that tried to look at agricultural things. That was quite good. That was quite a good coalition because they had both exporters and importers and of agricultural goods on the same group. But then there were quite a few others, and they tended to be quite extreme in their views. Interestingly, the best, because I wrote a quite long paper for this for the World Trade Organization, the negotiation lessons from the Uruguay round. It's 20 pages long, so I can't get into much detail. What really struck me was the most successful coalition was led by Felipe Jaramillo, who's a Colombian. He was the Colombian ambassador to the GATT, and he led one of the groups, and it became known as the Jaramillo process. Felipe Jaramillo. There's another person with the same name who's a vice president of the World Bank, but that's a different one. In fact, I got in touch with one of the World Bank and said, I was so impressed by what you did in the Uruguay round. And he said, no, that's an older guy who's just got the same name as me. So, but the Jaramillo process was fantastic because what they did was they pulled together lots and lots of very straightforward factual information. They were not influenced by whether it's in favor of the South or the North. They didn't get into the emotional arguments and how badly the North was treated the South or anything like that. They just laid out all the facts. They had members of their group that included some industrialized countries like Canada and Australia. They didn't include the UK or Germany or or the US, but they did include some others, and so they're a real mix, and that was the most successful coalition. So when you're forming coalitions in negotiation, make sure you've got like-minded people and make sure you're not too extreme so that you push other people in the wrong direction. Now, I want to mention the reconstruction of Bosnia because that was a big issue. You remember the war in the Western Balkans when Bosnia was fighting against Serbia and Croatia, and Bosnia was really caught in the middle, and there was horrifying things that happened there. There was a massacre in Srebrenica where the Serbs massacred hundreds of thousands of young Bosnian men and boys. And so when it was all over, it needed to be reconstructed. This is what will happen after Ukraine as well. When there's a peace treaty with Ukraine, there will eventually have to be reconstruction, and billions and billions and billions of dollars will flow into Ukraine to try to rebuild it. Reconstruction is very important because actually when they were trying to Richard Holbrooke, who's the American chief negotiator, trying to bring the parties together between Bosnia, Serbia, and Croatia, one of the carrots he dangled in front of them, he had quite a few sticks, like charging people with war crimes. But one of the carrots was, if you agree on a peace agreement, we will give you lots of money. We at the World Bank were charged with designing a big program of reconstruction to rebuild Bosnia after the war, to import hundreds and hundreds of pregnant cattle, for example, to build up the livestock again, giving small loans to small businesses, rebuilding education, to many, many things that we designed months before the end of the war. We had an office in Poland that was getting information smuggled out of Sarajevo, which was under siege, and we designed a big program to rebuild Bosnia. Now, in fact, the High Representative appointed by the European Union to oversee the peace and the reconstruction of Bosnia was Carl Bildt, the former Prime Minister of Sweden. The World Bank and Carl Bildt had a problem. They were fighting because Carl Bildt said, we should not give any aid. None of this reconstruction money should go to Republika Srpska, which is the Serb part of Bosnia, because they're not complying with the agreement that they must hand over their war criminals. There were two particularly horrible war criminals, Mladic and Karadzic, that were still at large, and Bildt said, until they hand over those raw criminals, we should not give them anything at all. The World Bank in return said, well, we can't really do that because our charter, the World Bank, our articles of agreement, say we must only be guided by economic considerations. We can't be guided by political considerations. So therefore, we can't differentiate between the Serb side or the Bosniak side or the Croatian side. So there was a real deadlock on this. And right after they signed the Dayton Peace Agreement, they had a donor meeting in Brussels. I attended that. And in a single day, they raised $5.1 billion, which seems very small now, but it was a very large amount in those days. So all these countries agreed they would give enough money to make up the 5.1 billion, and the World Bank's program was laid out, so that was what it's going to be spent on. And so then I went back, that was just before Christmas, and then in January I went back to Brussels, and there was another quite important meeting, and it was already in the press that this row, this fight between the World Bank and Carl Bildt. And on the way through London, I looked into the BBC, and I was interviewed on the BBC World Service, and they asked me about this disagreement. This is one of these occasions sometimes you have to think on your feet, and I needed to think of a solution that would work for both people, both sides, because I worked for the bank, but I wanted Carl Bildt to be happy. We needed him, and so I said, in answer to the TV and the radio interview, I said, look, that is true about the World Bank's rules, but Dayton Peace Accords was a political agreement. If it wasn't for that political agreement, we would never be here. We at the World Bank would not be helping the economy if it wasn't for that political agreement. And we are very fortunate that we have Carl Bildt to be able to say to us, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. So that's we need his advice, but he also needs to listen to our economic arguments that it's unfair on ordinary people in Republika Srpska if they're deprived of reconstruction money because they were not ones fighting the war, it was their leaders. So I arrived in Brussels thinking I might be in trouble. Fortunately, I saw Carl Bildt as soon as I arrived, and he said, Tim, that was a great answer. Come and have dinner with me tonight. So that felt really good, actually. So that was just trying to think of what both parties need in a negotiation. Because it's very topical, we've just had the announcement of a deal. I've not been looking at the news in the last hour, but I assume the deal is still on between the United States and Iran to end that conflict. Now, it's interesting looking at the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and comparing it with what there is about the nuclear program in the new Trump agreement, because there's hardly anything. They're not going to really do anything about that right away. Whereas the 2015 Iran nuclear deal was worked out over several years. It was incredibly hard work. And Baroness Cathy Ashton, who is the foreign minister of the European Union, she's British. I was with her last week. She was teaching in a program I was teaching in Oxford. I was talking to her about all these possibilities for Iran. That particular agreement, she was a very skillful diplomat. She listened much more than she talked, which is can't really say that about President Trump. And so she listened much more than she talked. Every time they had a round of meetings, because they met all over the place, the Iranians and the Americans and the European Union, whenever they met, either in Geneva or other places around the world, she would always get there the night before and have dinner with her Iranian counterpart. She'd go for walks in the wood with her Iranian counterpart. They knew that they were on opposite sides of the argument, but it was all very cordial and very comparatively friendly. So that is a much better approach. And so she's a very skillful diplomat. She listens a lot. And for instance, she also negotiated the agreement between Serbia and Kosovo, two age-old enemies in the Western Balkans. And at one point, the two leaders stood up and started shouting at each other. And she, as a woman in her late 50s, she just sat back with her arms folded and just looked at them. She said it was like watching a tennis match. She would look at one, look at the other, look at one, look at the other as they shouted at each other. And she was just sitting there like the mother with two boys fighting. And when they calmed down, she'd say, you finished? Very, 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 very skillful diplomacy. And she's negotiated with all the world's great leaders. And she's a very good listener, and she also is very conscious and has a lot of empathy. So that was, I want to make a reference to that. I'd like to also talk a little bit about some of my own negotiations that I've been involved in. Let me give you the first example, because these are just little bits of negotiations. I can't describe a full negotiation. In some cases, I was contracted to help people with the negotiations, and I had to sign an NDA, so I couldn't disclose what it was about. So I can't include those. But I mentioned NDRC in China. I did a lot of work, consulting work for the Asian Development Bank in the early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, and the Asian Development Bank was trying to get the Chinese to take a better approach to water issues. They wanted to involve civil society in China. At that time, it was easier to have a dialogue with ordinary people in China probably than it is today. But they were trying to set up meetings with NGOs and others in China, and they had sent a very nice Australian guy there, and he always came away empty-handed. He never got anywhere because he discovered when he got there that the water ministry in China had terrible relations with the Environmental Protection Agency, and they had very bad relations with the industry ministry. So you had these three ministries all competing, and so they would never agree. The guys from the Asian Development Bank wanted to set up big meetings to have open discussions on issues, and this guy always failed. So when I went there, I talked to the Chinese people in our office, or the Asian Development Bank's office in Beijing, and we talked very extensively about how the government is structured in China. As a result, I invited the head of the water part of the National Development and Reform Commission to have lunch with me. Now, NDRC looks like just any other alphabet soup of names, but it's one of the most powerful bodies in China. And all the other ministries pay attention to what it says. And NDRC has regional offices. They also have thematic offices, like this person in charge of water. So I invited him to lunch. We had a very friendly conversation. We didn't talk much about what I wanted. And towards the end, I said, the Asian Development Bank would like to hold 3 big workshops for the press. Now, there is not freedom of the press in China, so that was even more challenging than what the other guy had been trying to get out of them. I said we'd like to have three big workshops, one in Shanghai, one in Beijing, and one in Chengdu. Would the NDRC be prepared to partner with the Asian Development Bank in setting these up? Now, that was the key thing. I was asking the most powerful body in China to partner with the Asian Development Bank, not to just help us, but to be a partner. So they would be seen to be in charge. And it all happened. And it was just a case of doing my homework. It was not me particularly, it was the colleagues in the Beijing office of the ADB that gave me the advice. But that approach worked much better than just saying this is what we want, and because all the other ministries that didn't get on together, they just did whatever NDRC told them. These are just little snippets of negotiations, but I want to give you another example of something that happened in Shenzhen. Shenzhen, is this very vibrant city in southern China, right next to Hong Kong. And I've been there a lot, and I was negotiating with some people in Shenzhen who wanted to bring groups of Chinese entrepreneurs over to the UK. And the sort of trade mission that BritCham organizes in a way, except this was private sector, and there were just a lot of entrepreneurs. So I was going in each day for negotiations with my counterparts. And I had my colleague Ning, who's Chinese, she's now a Swedish citizen, a Chinese-Swedish citizen, always with me. She didn't interpret, but she could understand everything the other party was saying, so that helped me find out what was going on. All the negotiations were very friendly. And then one day, the lead negotiator from the other side came in, and he brought his daughter with him. His daughter was 12 years old, and she was carrying a little stool you sit on, a little bench stool that you sit on. And she had made it with her sister, and they hammered the nails together and the pieces of wood together. And it was a very sturdy little stool. And she'd written on it, "With love to Tim and Ning," and then some Chinese characters, and then from their names in English on the side. And I saw this and I thought, God, I've got 6 flights before I get home. How am I going to take this little piece of furniture on all these 6 flights? But I knew it was important to them because they were showing friendship. I needed to show friendship in return. I needed to show that I really cared. So I did. I carried this rather awkward stool back with me on all the flights, gave it to the flight attendant on every flight and said, please take care of this. When I got home, I set the stool down in our kitchen and took photographs of my grandchildren climbing on the stool and my grandchildren playing with it. And I sent it to the people in Shenzhen. They were so touched. They were really, I was showing that I cared. That meant so much to them. And when I arrived back for the next round of negotiations, they took us to a concert. They were very friendly to us. They even got me to come and give a lecture at their daughter's school because they have big classes in English there. So that was just an example. Showing you care is really important. People trust you. Now, I want to tell you another little story about something called the World Bank Special Facility for Africa. It's many years ago, but some of you may remember that there was a terrible famine in the early 1980s, a famine in Ethiopia. Many people died, and Bob Geldof, a British musician, set up the Band Aid concert. And there's this big global concert where the artists gave their time for free. It raised an enormous amount of money to help the starving people in Ethiopia. I was in the European office of the World Bank at the time, and the World Bank decided that it would set up a special facility to make the policy changes that are necessary to avoid future famines. And the aim was to try to raise $1 billion, 1 billion with a B dollars. So we had the meeting in our office in Paris, and we asked each of the countries to pledge how much money they give. The reason it was in Paris because the French had said they were going to give more than everybody else. So they wanted the meeting to be in Paris. They wanted to show off that they were doing more to help Africa than anyone else. So we had to decide who we're going to ask to speak first. So we didn't ask the French because we knew they were going to give a lot. We, in fact, asked the Italians because the Italian parliament had just voted a lot of extra money for foreign aid, and they didn't know how to spend it. So we thought, well, we'll ask them to go first because maybe they'll give a large amount. So the Italian delegate gave the amount in lira, which was many billions. Everybody got their calculators out to work out how much it was, and it was bigger than what the French had pledged. We then went to the French. They said, well, we already told you how much we're going to give. We're going to give a bit more than that. So we had a bidding war going on. The Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, they all were giving generously. And then it came to Japan. Now, Japan had just previously persuaded every other member country of the World Bank to give up a little bit of its voting power in the World Bank so that Japan would become number 2 after the United States, displacing Germany, France, and the UK. So everybody had helped Japan to become the number 2 in the World Bank, and that was very important to them. But they came to this meeting and said, we do not have instructions from Tokyo. So there's nothing from Japan. So at lunchtime, we asked the head of the Nordic delegation, a very charming woman from Norway, Jorunn Melem, if she would invite the Japanese to sit at their table. Now, the Scandinavians, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, they're all very friendly. They're polite. They're not hard. They're not tough, not difficult. So the Japanese guy was very happy to join them for lunch. Now, the moment they sat down, Jorunn Melem tore into him and said, how can you come to a meeting like this? We've just given up votes to give you more power in the World Bank. You cannot come to a meeting like that and not give. It's a matter of face. You will lose face if you don't give anything. So the Japanese delegate said, oh, okay. So the next morning, we'd got the press release written that we'd got 995 million, but just short of a billion. So it was disappointing we hadn't met our target. And then the Japanese delegate said, could I have the floor? And he's pledged twice as much as Italy, twice as much as France. And we got well over the $1 billion we sent out, and we got the press release changed. We'd won it. But it was a case of when you want to try to get an agreement on a negotiation, find out who your allies are, see who can do things on your behalf. For us to go from the World Bank and tell that to the Japanese are doing very difficult because we were hosting the meeting, but getting a third party to do what you want makes a big difference. Let me give you another small but not very significant, but still a thing that I experienced. I was helping a big British military company that produces very specialized equipment that all air forces need. If I tell you what it was, I'll be disclosing the name of the company, which I'm not allowed to do, but it's a very key piece. And they had a big contract with Boeing, and they were renegotiating the contract with Boeing, and Boeing was in turn negotiating a contract with the US Air Force. And the people I was talking to said, well, and I said, be careful about deadlines. If they're forcing you into a deadline, don't allow them to force you into meeting a deadline. Say, we'll come and meet on another occasion. We'll go away for 2 weeks and come back and talk about it. The guys I was talking to said, well, we're taking 10 people over there, and each person's airfare is going to be £3,000. So that's £30,000 if we have to go back to the UK and go back again. And I said to them, £30,000 in order to get a better deal. This contract is worth £250 billion. £30,000 is nothing. So what I'm saying is, I mention this because don't let the little things get in the way of the much bigger picture. It's easy for that to happen, that you don't realize that the bigger picture, but it does also bring up the issue of deadlines, and don't allow people to impose deadlines on you, because they're going to make life much more difficult. Another one negotiation I was personally involved in was I was working with the Commission on Growth and Development. That was a commission set up by the World Bank, but it had 22 members, which included 2 Nobel Prize winners. It included Pablo Kuczynski from Peru. It included Alejandro Foxley from Chile. It included President Zedillo of Mexico. They were an amazing group of people. And Mike Spence, who was the Nobel Prize winner, who was chairing the commission, thought he had an agreement from everybody on what the commission's report would say. This was a commission that was looking into why it is that certain countries can have sustainable, equitable growth for more than a decade. And it was looking at which countries did and which didn't, and the lessons you can learn from the countries that had done this most successfully. There were lots and lots of many issues in stake, and so the final meeting was called in Washington to try to get everybody to agree on a final set of priorities. So when it went to that final session, everybody around the table who had very big egos, they all had their own pet things that they wanted to get across. And at the end of the session, it was a morning session, at the end of the morning, Mike Spence, the Nobel laureate who chaired the conference, said, we had so many agreements, so many understandings. Now everybody is saying completely different things. They've all got their own favorite things that they're pushing, and we're never going to get an agreement. The report will never come out. So in the afternoon, my task was to talk to them about how they were going to sell the report, how they were going to get people interested in reading it. So I said to them, look, I'm going to ask you, I heard what you said this morning. You've got lots of different points of view, but I'm going to hand out a card, a card like this. You can see that sort of size card. And I'm going to hand every one of you a card. Now, I felt, here I'm talking with presidents and prime ministers and leaders of countries. I felt I had a bit of a cheek asking them to do this. I said, on one side of the card, please write down the 3 most important conclusions of the report. Don't look at what your neighbor's doing. I felt like a school teacher. Don't look at what your neighbor's doing. Just write down the 3 most important ones. Turn the card over and write the 3 most unexpected or counterintuitive things in the findings. So we collected the cards up. The next morning, my colleague who was with me there, working with me, had tabulated them all. And it turns out almost everybody wanted exactly the same things. They wanted publicly to state their differences and be really macho. But in fact, they all wanted roughly the same thing. So that we got a solution. And for the most unexpected, they all agreed the most unexpected thing to contribute to good economic growth was feeding infants essential micronutrients so they would learn how, they would have the ability to think. So just a few more slides, and then there's time for questions at the end. Just a few things what not to do. Don't lie. Never lie in negotiations. Don't walk away from a negotiation because you're angry. And don't make threats which you cannot or will not follow through. Very, very important. We saw that with Obama and the red lines. So just a little bit about the importance of listening. Negotiators, the best negotiators are particularly good listeners. They know about active listening, this is the Chinese character ting, which is for the character for listening. This bit is ears for you to hear. So I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, this is ears to hear. This is eyes to see. This is mind to think. This is heart for your feelings. And this is undivided attention in order to focus. It's a really neat explanation of a Chinese character, old Chinese character. Listening is very, very important. So let me just give you one last slide. Listen before talking and be seen to be listening. God gave us two ears and one mouth. Use them in that ratio. So I want to ask you if you can recognize the best listener on the next slide. If anybody can write in the, can you see the whole slide, or is part of it covered up?
No, we see the four men.
You see the four men, right?
Yeah.
So I want to see if anybody wants to just write in the chat which person they think is listening the most intently. Well, the one on the extreme right, you look, he's looking very carefully at the speaker. The speaker's a nobody, it doesn't matter. The one on the extreme right is attention, eyes directly on the speaker's mouth, really listening to what he's saying. The one in the middle we don't know. The one next to the speaker is not paying any attention at all. Does anybody recognize who the one on the right is, who's the best listener there? This was taken 33 years ago. It's a long time ago. Well, it was former President Jimmy Carter. He was the one who really was listening properly. Anybody recognize the guy on the left who's speaking? Anybody recognize him? Well, I'll tell you. I wear different glasses now, and I have a lot less hair, but I was the one who Jimmy Carter was paying such rapt attention to, so I'm very proud of that photograph. So that
Nice.
is, thank you. So we've got 10 minutes left. It's not a lot, but if anybody has any questions, I'll be very, very happy to answer them. And I'm willing to stay longer if you need it as well.
Okay, I will just spend 2 minutes explaining the masterclass that well, and first of all, thanks a lot for this wonderful explanation and sharing all your knowledge. This is like the tip of the iceberg, if we can say so, in terms of what we can learn from you in terms of negotiation, and thanks a lot. So I would like to present the master class that will be in August. It will be at the Gun Club, the Monday 24th and Tuesday 25th of August, with Professor Tim Cullen, founder of the Oxford Program on Negotiation. So let's see in terms, well, we will share this presentation with you. I would only like to see the agenda, in terms of the today course, and maybe you can introduce it.
Oh gosh.
This is in Spanish, but okay, so I will explain. Okay, the first day, stress management before negotiating, fundamentals of negotiation, then the preparation to negotiate, power and influence, with role play case studies, then negotiation and uncertainty, also with a case study. And the last topic for day one, it's psychology and cognitive sesgos. The English word, I don't recall it right now, but it will also be a role play. So all the exercises, bias, okay, cognitive bias. Thank you. And for second day, it will be persuasion and influence, another role play in terms of multi-party negotiations, then preparation to you will do the preparation to the simulation, long distance negotiation, then executive simulation, the final one with role play, and then we will do the closing of the agenda and present the certificates for all the participants. This will be only in English. The session, there will be no translation available, unfortunately, but this should be I think if a B2 level, it should be necessary for attending this course. And so in terms of the pricing, a 5-day program at Oxford University, it's £9,500. So here we're having this 2-day course and including the coffee breaks, lunch, welcoming kit, all the material, and the certificate also by the Oxford State Business School and BritCham, and the investment will be 3,950,000 pesos plus VAT for members, and non-members 4,950,000 pesos plus VAT. And we are offering a 10% discount for the people that connected today to the webinar. This discount is available only until July 15th for registration and payment before July 15th. So you have 1 month, almost 1 month to organize everything, your agenda, and also budgeting. So we're very happy to have Professor Tim Cullen here in Bogota for the first time in Colombia. So I hope that you can participate in this masterclass. I think it will be a wonderful experience, both because of all the knowledge that Professor Cullen can share with us, but also with the networking experience for these 2 days. So Tim, I don't know if anybody has any questions that we could answer, but well, I would like to thank you again for having us today, like with this webinar introductory for our masterclass.
Thank you very much, Santiago. And I want to also pay tribute to your colleagues who've been enormously helpful to me in setting this up. I am very excited about coming to Colombia for the first time. I've been to Ecuador a number of times because my son-in-law was the deputy British ambassador there, so we used to go visit them. The only thing I didn't like about Ecuador is the altitude. So when I come to Bogota, I'm going to arrive a couple of days early so that I get over the altitude and the jet lag and so on. But I'm very excited about coming. Just a word or two about the agenda there. You can see what's interspersed is role play simulations where you'll be given a description of a scenario, and then you'll be given your role, and it gives you guidance as to how to negotiate with your counterpart who will have been given a different role and will have different instructions. And so you really learn by doing. You get into those negotiations, and then we debrief afterwards. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you. So I've not chosen most of the simulations are ones I've written myself, by the way, and they're not terribly complicated ones, but they're ones that really tax you. The one we do at the end is called Fujian Factory. It's a negotiation between a Swedish tractor company and a Chinese assembly plant on assembling a new tractor in China. But they all use what you're learning in the program. So as we steadily work through the 2 days, I teach you more complicated things, and these simulations help you to play them out. And so the only one that has a lot of reading is the last one, Fujian Factory. So in addition to you getting that the night before, that's on the second day. So you'll be given that at the end of the first day. And so you can read it overnight, but also you'll be given 1 hour after lunch that day just to study that. The rest of them are a bit easier, a bit shorter. You don't need very long. And so we're trying to make it with minimum amount of reading. You will be sent some things to read in advance by PDF, so you'll get a chance to read those. But the reading is not very big. So I just wanted to reassure you of that. So that's, I mean, anybody's got any final questions, I'm very, very happy to answer them.
Okay, so I included in the chat the link for the interested participants to register, and also a link to your bio at Oxford University, and also like a course of reference of the 5-day course that I mentioned. So, well, I think it will be a great space for us to improve our negotiation skills in our business and environment and social too.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited about it. And now that I've finished preparing for this webinar, I start tomorrow preparing for the teaching in August.
Well, thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone. If you don't have any questions, well, we will finish for today. Thanks a lot again for everyone that joined. And thank you, Professor Cullen, for this time and your sharing.
Thank you
Muchas
very
gracias
much.
a todos y bueno, espero verlos en el curso en agosto.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Chao, chao. Feliz día. Thank you. Bye.